Once an apprentice to the legendary Darth Sidious, the Zabrak known as Maul was largely forgotten by the galaxy after his defeat at the hands of the Jedi Obi-Wan Kenobi. Maul, though, had not given up. Even after being sliced horizontally into two, Maul's hate towards Sidious and Kenobi, as well as the imbued night system magics, kept him alive. But it was not until the middle of the Clone War that his brother Savage Opress tracked him down, and they began their quest for revenge. The result was a takeover of Mandalore, but this drew the attention of Maul's old master Sidious. This was a threat to his own plans, and he travelled to Mandalore to put the Night Brothers in their place. In the throne room in the Sundari royal palace, Maul sensed the arrival of his master and tried to deceive him with his desires to return as the apprentice of Sidious. The Sith Lord saw through this deception, and Maul not only lost his brother, but any realistic chance of revenge. But what if Maul and Savage had somehow deceived Sidious? How would the rule of two be established? Could Maul achieve his goals? In the darkened throne room of the royal palace of Sundari, the latest ruler of the planet was in a seat of power. This was the Zabrak Maul, and beside him was his brother Savage Opress. As he meticulously planned for the next move, with the takeover of Mandalore completed, he sensed the familiar presence of his old master. Maul's plans were immediately put to one side, and knowing the power of Sidious, there was only one way to leave the upcoming encounter alive: deception. The two Mandalorian super commandos that Maul had positioned by the throne room's entrance were quickly choked out of their existence, and Sidious stepped through. Maul then quickly moved from his throne and bowed to Sidious. The Zabrak expressed his desire to return to the side of Sidious, and after what seemed an infinitely extended pause, Sidious told Maul to rise. Before Maul could celebrate this minor victory, the Sith Lord moved menacingly towards the Zabraks, and though he accepted Maul, this now meant Savage was surplus to the rule of two. Sidious smiled beneath his hood as he encouraged Savage to challenge his brother for his own place by his side, and Savage's face began to show his conflict. Maul realised that Sidious was up to his old manipulative ways, and he prepared for the inevitable encounter. Having already defeated him, he was confident of another victory, but this was exactly what Sidious would want. Savage soon ignited his double-bladed lightsaber and twirled it in front of him, and Maul responded by igniting his red lightsaber and darksaber together. Sidious merely stood and watched as Savage made the first move, and Maul quickly backpedaled towards the windows. With an acrobatic somersault, Maul slashed the glass panes and deliberately took the battle outside as Sidious remained in the throne room. The two Zabraks moved to the rooftops of the distinctive tower blocks, and now Maul pressed his skill advantage. Though Savage had improved, his form was still flawed, and Maul made a clean cut through the hilt of his brother's lightsaber. Maul could see Sidious moving out of the throne room to his level, and he powerfully force-pushed Savage to the ground below. As he looked downwards at his falling brother, he used the force to pull Savage away from an inevitable demise and limit the damage. After a brief moment, Sidious hovered to Maul's level and congratulated him for passing his first test, but with Dooku still present, Maul was not an apprentice yet. Sidious instructed Maul to remain patient, as an opportunity would soon present itself, but for now they returned to the royal palace. The Sith Lord wanted to know more about Maul's Shadow Collective, and Maul initially hesitated, sensing more of his master's manipulations at play, but now that he had become Sidious's apprentice again, his old fears about his master had returned, and he was left with no choice but to tell him about his allies. Sidious was moderately pleased by Maul's progress, as he had a range of allies from those in the Death Watch to others in criminal empires, and the Sith Lord decided that Maul could continue to control these, but the Zabrak would always answer to him. The Sith Lord left Maul to continue his recruitment, whilst he returned to Coruscant, and unsurprisingly, Count Dooku wanted to speak to him. The Separatist leader had sensed a disturbance in the Force, and Sidious told him of the return of Maul. Dooku felt somewhat threatened by the return of the Zabrak, but Sidious told him that he was a useful ally, neglecting to tell him that he had been replaced. As the Sith rule of two began to re-establish itself, down on the ground of Sundari, Savage Opress realised he was not a part of it. Though Maul had cushioned his fall, Savage was still in a world of pain. The Zabrak slowly pushed himself over the ground and to his feet, and he spotted the remnants of his lightsaber several meters away from him. Pulling these to his hands, he gave them a quick glance, then threw them away, as he knew that it was beyond repair. The battered lightsaber accidentally struck the foot of a terrified citizen, and the other citizens who were indoors rushed out to the commotion. At the sight of the towering Zabrak, many of them ducked back inside, and those who were brave enough to step forwards were greeted with powerful force pushes. The frustrated Savage did not care for any of these people, but as he began to hear the battle between the new Mandalorians and the Death Watch, he decided it was time to leave. The pain now fueled him in his movements, and with his enhanced agility, he leapt from the ground towards the battle and onto the rooftops of one of the buildings. But as the combatants flashed past him, Savage's eyes focused on what was trailing them, which were the Gauntlet starfighters. The Zabrak pulled one of Maul's super commandos from the air and choked them until they were coerced into lending him one of their ships. After resisting the urge to push the struggling super commandos back to where he had fallen, Savage folded his arms until the ship arrived, and the Mandalorian pilot saw his fellow warrior stricken on the ground, so wisely decided against fighting the Zabrak. Savage stomped to the helm of the ship and swooped away from the rest of them, then set course for Dathomir. Once out of Mandalore, Savage slumped back in the pilot's seat and let out a groan of pain and annoyance. The reality was that he was not an equal of Maul, and unworthy to be a part of the rule of two. Though Maul had saved him from a worse fate, Savage now felt uncertain about the loyalties of his brother, and he wished that Talzin was with him to give him advice. Just as he had this thought, the spirit of Talzin materialized in front of him in a green mist. Talzin was weakened after repairing Maul, but even in her spirit state, her power was still evident to her son. As she moved around the cockpit, Talzin assured Savage that Maul's loyalties were firmly with her and Dathomir, and even though the Shadow Collective had been exposed, she believed it was a worthy sacrifice for Maul's new position. As for Savage, she didn't see his defeat as a failure, but as an opportunity. His survival was only now known to a few of Maul's super commandos, and Talzin had a plan to strengthen the Zabrak's connection to the Force, then hopefully complete a revenge on Sidious. At that moment, the Sith Lord was thinking the exact opposite, and with the confirmed existence of Maul, it meant that Talzin had survived the Battle of Dathomir and could pose a threat to his future plans. Sidious contemplated asking Maul to continue his tests by eliminating Talzin, but he thought of an even more devious test, which involved Count Dooku. With the belief that Talzin was most likely on Dathomir, Sidious decided to dispatch Dooku to find her and complete the unfinished business. When Dooku considered taking Grievous to redeem his own mistake, Sidious denied the request, claiming he had other plans for the cyborg, which was hiding the truth. After Dooku had accepted the order, setting up a confrontation with he and Maul was simple, with the Zabrak eager to assert his position as the real apprentice. In reality, Maul had an ulterior motive for accepting the mission, as he knew the Savage was also going to Dathomir and possibly to the ruins of the Night Sister lair. So when Maul eventually entered the atmosphere of Dathomir, he was surprised to sense the presence of another darkside user. The Zabrak's lightsaber was instinctively in his hand, and he scanned his eyes through the red mist whilst he progressed to the lair. Maul soon saw the stone altar, which was normally reserved for the sisters' rituals, but standing beside it was the unpleasant sight of Count Dooku. Maul wondered why Dooku was on Dathomir, having expected to fight him elsewhere, but then it dawned on Maul. Dooku was after Talzin. Maul tightened the grip on the hilt of his lightsaber, and without even turning, Dooku confidently told Maul that he knew Talzin was alive. The current Sith apprentice did not show any emotion after anticipating such a response, and he coldly told Dooku that he had been replaced. Dooku's head jolted around to face Maul, and his eyes narrowed. Sensing the truth and conviction in Maul's words, Dooku believed that this was a part of the mission to eliminate Talzin, and he ignited his curved-hilted lightsaber. Maul was the first to make a move, and he aimed to use a combination of his lightsaber and also his robotic legs. Dooku resisted the Zabrak with his patented form too, and he aimed to dissect the Sith with precision. As the two duelists tried to get the upper hand over each other, Dooku strategically targeted Maul's lower limbs with lightning attacks, and the Zabrak growled as he began to lose his balance. Dooku sensed this slight weakness, and he told Maul that they need not be adversaries, as they were both enemies of Sidious. As the two stood several meters away from each other, the Kaleesh cyborg General Grievous stepped out from a previously hidden ship. In response, Talzin appeared out of thin air, and what followed was a tense standoff. Dooku finally broke the silence and called them all victims of Sidious, then suggested to Talzin to work together. After the Separatist's previous visit, Talzin was understandably reluctant about working with Dooku, but she recognised that Sidious was the bigger threat. Talzin wanted a deal on her terms, so she suggested using the same ritual that had tortured Dooku. After she repaired the cauldron, all that would be needed was a lock of Palpatine's hair. With his new status, Maul was the only person who was capable of achieving such a task. As for Dooku, Even though he was betrayed, he still had control over both his droid army and the clone project, so his plan was to change their loyalties. The two sides were not even close to trusting each other and were already thinking of alternative plans in the event of more betrayals, but in the name of defeating Darth Sidious, they cautiously proceeded with their plans. Maul thought carefully about how he was going to obtain Palpatine's hair, and he knew that any close-range attempt would be sensed by the Sith Lord. As a result, Maul decided his best option was to access Palpatine's office, either on his own or through one of his allies. In his previous tenure as Sidious's apprentice, Maul had perfected the art of stealth and practiced hiding around the Jedi Temple district, but now his existence and face was known, the risk was too high, and the more calculated option was to arrange a meeting between Sidious and Maul's Shadow Collective. When Maul proposed such a meeting to Sidious, the Sith Lord agreed, but questioned the choice of location. Maul confidently dismissed the claims about any potential threat towards his allies, and used this as an opportunity to place his own Mandalorian super commandos as guards and pilots. The hierarchy of the Black Sun and the Pikes, amongst others, were lured by Maul to Coruscant, in spite of their protests, and Sidious decided to play Maul's game. Sidious pretended to speak to them about expanding their area of influence, and he guided them through to his ceremonial office. Maul's super commandos were also allowed through, but they were forced to relinquish their weapons, as they joined the background of the meeting. Maul had anticipated this security measure, which is why two further super commandos were waiting outside the building. This pair targeted the vents in the adjoining corridor to the ceremonial office, and whilst the pair on the inside obscured the doorway, two more commandos slipped through. Unfortunately for Maul's commandos, this was where their plan started to go astray. The meeting between Palpatine and the Shadow Collective was a lot shorter than Maul had planned, and when they got up to leave, Palpatine saw the Mandalorian super commandos moving rather slowly and deliberately. Palpatine called his royal guards from the nearby security room, but they failed to respond. The Sith narrowed his eyes, and now his guests looked at him with fear. Striding purposefully to the doorway to his personal rooms, he choked the two super commandos, then burst through to the nearby security room, where his royal guards had fallen over the controls. Sidious quickly summarised the situation, and he determined that the commandos he choked were merely a distraction. With an examination of the security recordings, he saw two more commandos entering via an exhaust vent, and he knew Maul was trying to get something. After searching through his archives, which had been untouched, Palpatine was left to wonder what exactly the Zabrak was planning. All he knew was that Maul's loyalties were questionable at best, and his status as apprentice was on a timer. As Palpatine cleared the bodies of the two commandos and dismissed his allies, the two surviving commandos managed to escape with Palpatine's hair. The commandos split up, each taking a sample of the hair in a modified data stick, and they took different starfighters for safety. One commando took the somewhat disgraced Shadow Collective away from Coruscant, whilst the other boarded a cargo ship. Unfortunately for the latter of the two, an emotional Obi-Wan Kenobi had just returned from Mandalore. As the Jedi Master entered the air traffic of Coruscant, he was thinking about what he would say to Anakin at the temple when he saw the distinct red and black armour of Maul's Super Commando. Obi-Wan had to convince himself that he was not hallucinating or stuck in a nightmare, and then his Jedi instincts kicked in. Lowering the ship into a suitable spot, Obi-Wan thought about asking for help from the temple, but decided against it for now and tracked the armored commando. The slightly shifty movements and constant looks behind drew more suspicion, and Obi-Wan saw that his target was approaching the docks. As the commando looked to avoid the customs officers, Obi-Wan quickened his steps and made his move. The Jedi tackled the commando to the floor, and resisting the instant urge to give in to his anger, he used a well-calculated force push to slam his opponent into the closest wall to knock them out. The customs officers decided not to interfere, given this was Jedi business, and Obi-Wan carried the commando back to his ship, then the temple hangar. Anakin was waiting for him on his arrival, and once Obi-Wan told him what had happened on Mandalore, their attention turned to the unconscious commando. The two Jedi escorted the captive to a holding cell, and then summoned Mace Windu. A quick search unveiled the data stick, and this was taken to the analysis chambers for further research, whilst the Jedi began their interrogation. The commando revealed under the duress of a mind trick that Maul asked their team to infiltrate Palpatine's office and obtain a sample of Palpatine's hair, but the reason was unknown. Obi-Wan looked thoughtfully as the ray shield shimmered to enclose the commando back in the cell, and he thought about what possible use Maul could have for Palpatine's hair. The Jedi, who were oblivious to the Shadow Collective's visit, was surprised that the Chancellor had not reported such an incident or called for their assistance. During the interrogation, the commando had revealed that 2 of the team had perished in the office, which would have alerted the Chancellor. As much as Obi-Wan hated to admit it, perhaps a meeting with Maul would be beneficial. Though Obi-Wan had been prescribed rest by the Jedi, Windu knew the significance of the mission to Obi-Wan, and his knowledge of Maul outweighed anyone else's in the Jedi Order. Obi-Wan did not want to resort to a wild banter chase, so he proposed that they attach a tracking device to their captured commando and release them back to Maul. Windu saw no alternative to this idea, so they led the commando out of custody in the hope of locating Maul. With that plan in action, the Jedi walked to the analysis chambers, and there the droids determined that the hair was indeed Palpatine's. The Jedi appeared to be stuck at the dead end until there was an update from their commando's tracking device, so they went to the archives for any clues. With the help of Jocasta Nu, the Jedi found hair being used by Night Sisters on Dathomir to inflict a curse, and now Maul's plans made more sense. Whilst the Jedi just discovered what Maul was planning, the ship containing the other hair sample had already found its way to Maul, and the Zabrak was on his way back to Dathomir. When he arrived, the spirit of Talzin and Savage had already repaired much of the village, and more importantly, the necessary apparatus for the ritual. Without her physical state, Talzin needed the help of the Night Brothers for the ritual, and she wanted to discover what effect this had on Sidious. Beginning to chant, the haze of the Night Sister magic swirled around her in the cauldron, and the Night Brothers joined in, whilst the voodoo doll of Sidious was lowered, then punctured by needles. Back on Coruscant, Palpatine had just completed a meeting with some of the Republic senators, and was on his way to the Senate arena when he felt an odd tingle through his body. The tingle soon turned to mild discomfort, but using his vast power, he was able to absorb the increasing pain. But when Sidious approached his repulsor pod, the pain increased to a point where his alchemically modified appearance began to react with the ritual. The Chancellor's face began to distort, and the other senators were growing concerned. Mas Amedda ordered the guards to escort the Chancellor to the closest medical facility, and the Jedi at the temple were soon alerted to this drastic change in the Chancellor's health. Anakin was of course the most concerned, given his closeness to Palpatine, and he rushed off in his speeder to visit his mentor. After he and the Jedi just uncovered the plot against the Chancellor, he berated himself for not anticipating such an attack, and he burst through the station guards to see Palpatine. The true age of Palpatine was beginning to show, and when he saw Anakin, he pleaded with him to go and find the cause of the pain after the medical droids had found no known causes for his disfigurement. Anakin dashed back out to the facility, and on the way back to the temple, he asked Windu and Obi-Wan to prepare to leave to go to Dathomir, whilst Ahsoka was to keep an eye on Palpatine and the other senators in case it was a widespread attack. Though it was yet to be proven that the attack was from Dathomir, the Jedi were confident, so they felt justified in bringing clone reinforcements to defend an attack against the Republic. The 3 Jedi kept in constant contact with those on Coruscant, and with every passing update, it seemed Palpatine's condition was deteriorating. By the time they reached Dathomir, Anakin was itching to confront whoever was causing the pain to Palpatine, but the 2 Jedi Masters were suspicious. If the Dathomirians were indeed the cause of the pain, it was as if they wanted the Jedi to know about it. Obi-Wan calmed Anakin until they landed, and to no one's surprise, waiting for them was Maul. An unmistakable tension cut through the air, especially between Obi-Wan and Maul, but the Jedi resisted the urge to draw their lightsabers. In his drawling voice, Maul asked the Jedi why they had ventured to Dathomir, and Anakin accused the Zabrak of performing a ritual to kill the Chancellor. Rather than showing anger at Anakin's accusations, Maul gestured to the Jedi to follow him to the Night Sisters' lair, and they reluctantly complied. Their brief walk allowed them a glimpse of the massacre which had taken place, and the now lifeless terrain. All that remained was Talzin, Savage, and her cauldron. Windu held the Jedi back before they could tip the cauldron, and calmly but firmly asked Talzin why she was torturing the Chancellor. The answer did not come from Talzin, but rather a hologram that suddenly materialized to her side, and it was Count Dooku. The Separatist leader turned to Obi-Wan and told him that he should have listened to him on Geonosis. Anakin and Windu turned to Obi-Wan as the Jedi Master remembered Dooku's words, and he told him about the mysterious Darth Sidious being behind the Republic and the Clone War. Windu put the pieces together and muttered one name, which was Palpatine. Just as he arrived at this revelation, Dooku informed them that there had been a large explosion back on Coruscant, and it seemed Palpatine was the cause. Whilst the Jedi were on Dathomir, Palpatine was turning the pain inflicted by Talzin into strength, and eventually it could not be contained. In a giant towered explosion, the Sith Lord decimated the facility, and the whole of Coruscant felt a shockwave that was so large that it caused a power outage. Ahsoka was amongst the Jedi helping the senators out of the darkened Senate building, and the other Jedi rushed out of the temple to assist those injured in the explosion or those in the Senate. Yoda was not amongst these, however, as he felt the echo of the dark side from the source of the explosion, so he ventured to find out more. The Grandmaster moved swiftly to the site of the destruction, and until the power grid was repaired, his lightsaber would be his torch. The once towering med center was reduced to ruins, but Yoda soon unearthed a worrying amount of Sith artifacts and remnants of a meditation area. As he called for more Jedi to investigate these pieces of evidence, Yoda was joined by Quinlan Vos, and the Master used his psychometry on the medical bedding that Palpatine had been attached to. Such was the overwhelming sensations of the dark side, Vos fell to the floor, and Yoda finally realised that Palpatine was the cause. Whilst he ran back to the Jedi Temple, the explosion on Coruscant had a dramatic effect on those on Dathomir. The cauldron used for the ritual exploded, and Talzin could not maintain her spirit form and faded, while Savage was also weakened by the blast. Dooku quickly confirmed that the cause was Palpatine, and everyone had to move quickly to trap him before he left the planet. Anakin and Obi-Wan ran back to their ship to receive the incoming transmission from Yoda, and they suggested deploying the clone troopers, which were now altered to be against Palpatine. Yoda was skeptical, given that they were relying on information from Dooku, but he decided to deploy almost all of the clone troopers in the Republic military base. The Jedi of the Temple were also called into action, and Yoda spread them across the planet, and also put them in charge of the starships over the surface. Palpatine had anticipated this planet-wide lockdown, and after dispatching an array of personal shuttles as decoys, he made a fatal mistake. He executed Order 66. The Sith Lord immediately knew something had gone wrong when the clone commanders began to close in on his location, rather than the Jedi on the planet, and he knew Dooku was the only person who could be behind this. It was now imperative for his plans that the traitors were eliminated at once, but searching for all his other allies, all of his communications were cut off. Palpatine had no choice but to cloak himself with the Force, and instead of looking to escape Coruscant, he moved to the Senate arena to address the galaxy. On his way to his podium, Palpatine ordered his Senate guards to turn on the emergency power, but waiting at his podium was an entire group of Jedi. As the power turned on and more of the Senate arena was revealed by the light, Jedi were appearing from every corner, and for the first time, Palpatine was the one who found himself a step behind. Out of the first group of Jedi, Yoda had finally made his way back from the search, and at the sight of the little green Jedi, Palpatine let out his fury again. His lightning attack dispersed in all directions and threatened to turn everyone into ash, but Yoda met it with his lightsaber. As two of the most powerful Force users tried to get the upper hand on each other, the other Jedi were eventually brave enough to lend their strength to the Grand Master, and their combined efforts pushed Palpatine's attack back onto himself. The Sith Lord's subsequent roar of pain shook the entire building, and the clone troopers used their grappling cables to try and tether the roof. As the dust settled on Coruscant, back on Dathomir, the Jedi were satisfied that the elusive Sith had been found and eliminated, but for Maul, this was only half of the revenge, and now his focus was solely on Obi-Wan and the Jedi. The Zabrak turned to his brother, whom had recovered from the early explosion, and they began to discuss plans for an army, two of which were now in Dooku's hands. The brothers vowed to wrestle them away from Dooku, but upon leaving Dathomir, they were faced with a more immediate problem. The clone reinforcements had remained above Dathomir, and the Jedi were waiting. As soon as Maul and Savage moved his ship to try and escape, Anakin was leading a squadron of ARC-170 starfighters to hunt down the Zabrak, but instead of firing, they guided him to another squadron led by Mace Windu. The Master of the Order strategically fired his laser cannons to disable the propulsion of Maul's ship, and despite his best efforts to evade them, Maul was soon forced into the hangar of Windu's flagship. The Zabrak told his brother to remain calm, and this was in fact an opportunity to examine the clones. As the ship grinded to a stop, the clone troopers surrounded the ship, and before the Jedi could join them, Maul and Savage combined their powers to let out a force repulse in all directions. The walls of the damaged ship flew into the clone troopers, either injuring or killing them, and Maul led his brother, who was carrying one of the clone troopers, towards the medical base. The brothers barged any clone troopers out of the way until they were faced by Obi-Wan. Maul in particular vowed for this to be their final duel, and slowly crept towards the Jedi Master. Obi-Wan waited patiently for his old foe to make his first move, but to his surprise, it was Savage. The Zabrak's new and improved double-bladed lightsaber flew towards Obi-Wan's head, and it was only a well-timed roll which prevented a decapitation. Maul swung towards the Jedi Master and swiped down at the ground, but Obi-Wan dodged a flurry of attacks, leaving scorch marks over the floor. The Jedi Master continued to move back until they reached the clone barracks, and soon Maul and Savage were trapped in by a group of clone troopers and also Anakin, who had returned from his aerial pursuit. The Knight brothers scanned their surroundings for a solution, and their little choice but to try and burst through the clone troopers. Maul and Savage sprinted towards the smallest group of the 212th Battalion, but Obi-Wan blocked their path and ordered his clones to fire. The barrage of blaster fire was met by the twirling red blades, and now the Jedi moved into duel. Anakin and Obi-Wan pincered the Zabraks, and after taking Obi-Wan's advice from the duel on Florum, Anakin targeted Savage's knees in the narrow confines of the corridor. It was clear that Savage was still feeling the after effects of the explosion on Dathomir, and also the clear gap in technique between he and Anakin. The Jedi Knight continued his melee-based attacks, and eventually he crippled Savage. With a quick wave of his hand, Anakin summoned a Zabrak's double-bladed lightsaber to his hand, and ordered the clone to take him to a holding cell, as he helped Obi-Wan. The Master and Maul were locked in a titanic battle, and had moved past the clone troopers to another hangar, but waiting for them was Mace Windu. Obi-Wan and Windu seamlessly worked together, and Maul soon lost his darksaber. With a growl of fury, the Zabrak charged towards Obi-Wan, whilst launching any projectiles he could find. Obi-Wan, though, remained calm amidst the chaos, and waited patiently for his moment. Then with one single strike, he scythed through the torso of the Zabrak. Maul looked down at the wound, and then to Obi-Wan. In his final moments, he realised that from the time Sidious had taken him from Dathomir, he was destined for failure. Obi-Wan almost felt sorry for Maul, and he decided to return him to Dathomir so he could be laid to rest. After this, Savage was transferred to a holding cell in the Jedi Temple, and the Republic transitioned to a new leadership. The Republic and the Separatists entered into a period of tension, in which the Republic tried to take back control of the clone army, and this time they would be prepared for another war.